Call this meeting of the Norwood City Council Chambers to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, in the body we congregate in these council chambers, we pray for divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to your holy will. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As you can tell, it's pretty obvious I'm not Ken Miracle. Ken's not able to be with us tonight due to his job situation, and so as pro tem, I'll be taking over his seat, and hopefully I will do justice. I just ask for people's patience and understanding when I do mess up, because I'm sure I will. Next up, we have any amendments to the agenda. We got to do roll call. Yeah, see, already. Go ahead.
Mr. Bonzel.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelsch.
Here.
Mr. Thompson. And Mr. DiNardo is here. And Mr. Braden.
Here.
Right. Letter E is amendments to the agenda. We have 3 amendments. The first is to swap in L1. We're swapping in the exhibit. We're swapping it out for the one that was in there. And then we will be adding L5, which is about body cams. And L6 will be adding, which is about the dump truck. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. I'd like to move the agenda, or move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Thompson. Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here. Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
Minutes from previous meetings. We have minutes from the June 22nd, 2021. Motion to accept the minutes. Mr. DiNardo?
Yes, please.
Second. Mr. Braden? Any discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
Next up, we have hearing from public hearing and public. Let's see. First off, we have. Is it Renee?
Do you want to do Dana first, since we have her on the agenda?
That would be next, and then her and I think Brian was.
These are requested
Address
to address
council.
council, so Dana's first. Yeah, we don't
All right.
have any public hearings today.
Dana?
Okay. All right. Is that the right spot?
We don't have anything in here, Steve.
Pardon me?
Like in here, we don't hear her. Go ahead. There we go.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Okay. Dana Bowl. I live at 3947 Ellesmere, and as you know, I have a project called Keep Norwood Cool. And so tonight I'm here to talk about our health and wellness survey. Good evening, council members. I'm here tonight on behalf of our Norwood City Health Department and our Community Health Grant participatory mapping to keep Norwood cool. A key initiative of the grant is a health and wellness survey, which has been organized by our research team and is under IRB protocol. Norwood can benefit greatly from the health and wellness survey as it points us to our strengths and our areas of improvement. Citizens of all demographics trust and value our Norwood Health Department and its accessibility. Such a survey strengthens the necessary credentials of the Norwood Health Department and also establishes it as a leader and as an agent of wellness and health, not just inspections and punitive measures. During the pandemic, the essential role of our local Norwood Health Department was made starkly clear, and they shouldered their responsibilities with grace, efficiency, and compassion. And I didn't even know he was going to be here tonight. I personally value the convenience, cleanliness, and excellent customer service of our local health department. If you are interested in helping with the survey, I need volunteers to help gather surveys from our shut-ins and neighbors who are not on social media and email. I may even have room for another intern if you have a recommendation. So if you work, stay, pray, or play in Norwood, you should take this survey. So and then I shared in your email and your letter the link, and I gave you some graphics too to kind of help. And I may post those on Facebook, but you know, we have a lot of people that work here, and according to research, those people are eligible to take the survey because they're spending 8 or 10 hours a day. They're walking our streets, they're going to lunch, they're driving, they're parking, and they have health issues that may or may not relate to our landscape. We have people that are in, you know, softball leagues and bowling leagues and what have you, and they spend, you know, this is part of their life being here, so they should take the survey. So I had honestly hoped to have Victor and Melinda here. I know it's a drag seeing me here again, and they would have been a lot more interesting, but I just know that everybody, when they sit on their porch, they probably know 2 or 3 people who aren't on Facebook, who you could walk over with your phone and the link, and they could take the survey. So that would be so helpful because we don't want to have a skewed representation of just our super active young people in Ward 2. We want to have everyone. So, thank you. Any questions? Not really. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Brian, did you have anything that you wanted to add on with that, or? Okay. All right. Next up, we have. Is it Peter Crosby? You have 5 minutes.
Hey there, everybody. How you doing tonight? Thanks for 5 minutes. I live at 2454 Duck Creek. I own 3 buildings down there that I purchased. The first one about 10 years ago. It was an abandoned building. It was a crack house. It was a mess. I spent a ton of money rehabbing it, and I've been renting it and trying to enhance the neighborhood. I have since moved into a second building there, and I own a third. I've got tenants who've been there for a long time, and I'm here tonight to express my displeasure with the situation relative to the sewage backup in the basements that happens, not always, but occasionally, and I understand that some of my fellow Norwoodians back here have it a lot worse than I do, but it's pretty bad where we're at down on Duck Creek. We're right across the highway from Rookwood, There's no sewage in Norwood. There is on Duck Creek. Okay? There's going to be no sewage at Playing Park, but there will be at Duck Creek. And the expansion that's occurred in these neighborhoods without dealing with this problem, which is recurrent and has been in place for a number of years, it's important to me. And I don't know whether my facts are right or not, but it's my understanding that this issue was adjudicated by the EPA, who sued the Metropolitan Sewer District, who Norwood is a part of, and they lost. So how come nothing's being done? So I understand it's challenging. I understand all of that. But the infrastructure that's happening needs to be upgraded if we're going to upgrade the rest of the stuff around here. That's all there is to it. I mean, it's common sense in my mind. And I wanted to come here tonight to at least express my displeasure with that. A couple of anecdotal stories about it. I have one tenant who has lived in one of my buildings for, golly, 45 years. Okay? This past time, we didn't get hit as bad, but it was bad enough. We had to have professional services come in. Can't use any of the basements in my 3 buildings. So that's in essence, I have one building that I've invested in Norwood that I can't use. You know? I mean, that's unacceptable. My one tenant, when we had the big one about 6, 7 years ago, I might be a little off on my time, but so she was out on the street picking through the boxes and the stuffed animals that she had saved for 25 years that were her 3-year-old child's who died. Okay? These are real issues. We are real people out here who have real problems, you know, and it's my understanding that I'm hearing we got this new administration and everybody's going, oh, things are going to change, man. It's really going to change. Well, we'll see if that happens or not. You know, I'm quite hopeful. Hopes and dreams are something else, you know, but they're not necessarily action. And I don't know. I got it all out without screaming and yelling and jumping up and down. You know, I get it. You guys, and I thank you, all you people, for doing what you're doing. You know, it's public service is amazing. I do mine in different ways. But I do thank you for your help. It really seems like this is about the time to do it. You know, I don't understand how these major projects get approved when, I mean, were there no studies done as to whether the infrastructure could handle this stuff? I mean, that sounds like malfeasance to me. When I came home last Wednesday night from visiting with my children, I was babysitting, the water coming off of 71 on that wall, that's about 20 feet high, it looked like Niagara Falls. It was coming over. So heavy. So that puts into play the DOT. You know, I don't know how much juice you guys have with the Metropolitan Sewer District, but you got to have some. You know, and I don't know. I'm running out of time. I was just trying to spread it out so you can get my 5 minutes in. But thank you for letting me address you all, and all us other people here who are suffering with this problem. You know, I'm praying for everybody because we all need it. You know, so boom, right on the money.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your help.
Next, we have Jennifer Pence.
Good evening, members of council and fellow citizens. Just last night, a small storm rolled through Norwood. I'm sure you all heard it. It was quite loud. Meteorologist Steve Horsemeyer described it on the 11 o'clock news as noisy, not severe, and not enough rain to cause any flooding. Well, Mr. Horsemeyer has obviously never heard of Elm Avenue in Norwood. This is not a new problem for the residents of Elm. My parents purchased their home here in 1977 and have been flooded countless times in the years since. Sometimes it's minor damage, and others the damage is significant. In just the last 2 weeks, beginning June 30th, Elm Avenue has been flooded in some capacity 5 times. The most recent being 5 o'clock this evening. 2 of those times were in one night, on June 30th. The first time the water came up, I commented to my neighbors, well, we made it to the end of June this year before the first flood, only to be hit a second time about 3 hours later that night, far worse than the first one. Some years it's happened as early as February, March. It's not always the rainy season that brings the floods. In January of 2020, I came before you asking for a plan to fix this decades-long problem. A solid plan has yet to be established and cemented in place. And while I understand that no one expected everything to be locked down for the better part of the year due to a pandemic, that time could have been used to research and to come up with a plan to be put in place as soon as the situation improved. The residents of Elm are tired of worrying every time the forecast calls for heavy rain. We're tired of clearing our yards and basements of debris every time this happens. We're tired of replacing appliances such as washers, dryers, water heaters at our own expense. I'm tired of getting phone calls at work from my dear neighbors telling me, hey, the water's coming up, you need to get home to check on your dad. That happened this evening just before 5 o'clock. Since July of 2019, my father and I have had to replace our water heater twice, and it'll likely be a third time if we can't get it dried out from the flooding on June 30th. And with the heavy rains coming this weekend in the forecast, I'm not getting it fixed until afterward because I'm not going to spend $2,000 to get it fixed just to have it ruined a couple days later. Recently, I've spoken with some of the neighbors about their concerns as well. What happens if a medical emergency occurs during a time when our street is impassable due to high water? What happens if a sinkhole were to open up on our street and swallow someone's house or car, or heaven forbid, someone's child? Are these the kinds of emergency situations that have to happen before something is done? And I understand that it's not only Elm Avenue that faces these problems. While we seem to be ground zero for 98% of all the floods in Norwood, there are other areas in the city that experience it as well. With all the new developments and trying to attract new residents and businesses to our city, what happens when those new people experience firsthand how things are handled or not handled, as the case may be? The time is now, with this administration, to do what none of the others have ever done and get this fixed for the city of Norwood. To show us that they do care about the residents and making this little city that we love a safe place for residents and visitors alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vince. Next, we have Pastor Sonny James.
Good evening. Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. Folks, people often ask me, Pastor, why are you so emotional and angry and frustrated? Well, it's real simple. I guess I grew up on the other side of the tracks, where people, like many of those that are sitting before you tonight, have often had to deal with administrations that either they try to use their legal leverage to foster or help continue their protocols, or they've used their community influence by allowing only individuals that actually follow their protocols. I'm passionate because when I see a mother cry, where I come from, that means that we have to take notice. That means that we have to do something different about it. Yet in Norwood, it saddens me to say that we continue our same old protocols. Now, I'm not the best in math, but I don't think I'm that far off when we have an issue over 40 years. Well, if you look at me, some of you might say that I have a history of how decades and decades and decades of the same old nonsense goes on, and it really makes people feel like they're not listened to, they're not being heard, or they don't even care to be heard. And then they use their influence to create a party that says, well, if so-and-so who's very popular can come up with a creative lie and get all your mentees and get all the folks in the city that think like you, who act like you, who are too afraid to come up against the status quo. That's the mindset that leads to where we are. I don't even live on Elm Avenue, and I'm frustrated. I have people that I care about, and not just on Elm, but throughout the city of Cincinnati at large. Folks, we have some real issues. And my thing, again, my 13-point plan, I think some of you have been here long enough to review it. We've got to make sure that we're more resident priority. We've got to make sure that we call more public hearings. Oh, I wanted that piece of gum. We've got to make sure that the residents, listen, you don't have to listen to me. You try not to anyway. But all of you know I'm not going anywhere. When I see children show up, and I look at the faces of people that look arrogant to me, yeah, that makes me angry. Yeah, that makes me sometimes act out of character. I don't want to. Not that the letters will deter that. They don't. They won't. What I want us to do is to, if a family member comes up to you all and says, hey, I've got an issue, let's call a public hearing. Let's actually act like we care. Let's actually sit down and say, well, what's your concern? And then actually tell them what you're doing to rectify it. It may be out of your control, but why is it they don't know? They don't know because of status quo. And when I look in the mirror, you know, my biggest agenda is racial equality and racial equity. If we can't address somebody that can't get into their own house, how in the world do you think people like me are really going to think that you give a really hootenanny about the other issues that surround people like me? You don't. Or at least that's the perception. Norwood, let's change it. Let's really listen. Let's call a public hearing. Let's just tell people. Racial equity. Let's talk about our flooding issues. Let's just get together and talk about it like we really care. God bless you all. Have a blessed day, blessed life. Peace.
Thank you, Mr. James. Next on the agenda, item I, reports of standing committees. We don't have any of those. Third reading of ordinances. There's no third readings. Second reading of ordinances, which would be ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and a market house and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose. And this would be for the second reading. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to motion we have the second and third reading this evening.
Mr. Kelch with the first and second, or second and third, I mean. Mr. Dracy?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Mr. Dracy?
I think the reason that we're looking for a second and third reading tonight is that we may not be here for a second time in July. So I'd like to at least try to knock this out before the end of July, and I'm not sure that we're going to be here for that second meeting due to the parade. So that's kind of why I wanted to second that motion.
Jason? Let's go back here and turn your air on. We'll see if we can. Sorry, just because we can't hear. Is it locked? Sorry, with the air conditioning like that, it's hard to hear over what's going on. I'm not sure if you can do that.
It's our first meeting back. There's a couple
Yeah.
jitters.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
There we go.
It works.
Mr. Dracy, I'm sorry. If you could just repeat your comments, please.
The reason that I second the motion is that I don't believe we're going to have a second meeting here in July, seeing as the parade is at the second meeting date for July. And I kind of wanted to knock this out before the end of July. So that was my reasoning for seconding second and third reading for this ordinance.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to agree with Mr. Dracy on that. The second meeting of July that we would have is the day of the Norwood Day Parade, and I too would like to see this ordinance read and voted on here this evening.
Mr. Gennaro?
Yep. I guess it's just a question for the other council members. One of the reasons that we all voted to have 3 readings was to see if anybody from the public had any opinion that wanted to express to us. No one sent an email or a text to me. Did anybody get anything that maybe they could share, and this way I could better understand if there's any problems moving to it?
Mr. Dracy?
We had a lot of people share on the first go around with the first draft of this at the first council meeting that we had. And then the other person that wanted to share, I guess, didn't want to share because he's already spoke his piece once. So as far as what I've heard, it's just been the same things that I've heard in the past. That, you know, people like the ordinance as it's written now, and they're just hoping that it goes through.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. Last meeting, council meeting, I wasn't here, so I didn't get a chance to speak on this. And before that, we had asked it to go back to committee for some work. I realize my opinions here might not be shared by everybody, so hear me out. I completely agree with the sentiment of this ordinance, but I don't agree with the way that it is written and how we're handling it. So I'm just kind of break it down. Section 1 of this ordinance says council hereby declares Victory Park and adjoining Market House to be historical sites. I think that's a great idea. I think that should probably be an ordinance unto itself. I think we should probably look to see if there are other properties in Norwood or owned by the city that we would like to put like designate a historical site, and I think we could I would like to work with the Historical Society on that to see if we can identify any extras. When it comes to section 2, main issue. This is my main issue with the ordinance. In recognition of their past contributions and exchange for their continuing maintenance work, the City of Norwood shall not, without prior approval of the Victory Park Veterans Association and American Legion Post 123, remove, modify, or relocate any of the following features or memorials erected in honor and remembrance of the armed forces, including the following features, which list the areas of the memorial and the things that surround them. I don't want anything to happen to these memorials either, but I do have an issue placing the what happens with a certain piece of city property in the hands of a group that was neither elected nor appointed by elected officials within the city. We wouldn't give over a piece of property of the city to another group for them to make decisions on. That's why we're elected, is to make these decisions. And if you don't think that we're capable of making these decisions as elected officials, or you don't trust that council members and the mayor in the future will make the decisions in the best interest of the memorial, then I would suggest that we create a board to handle that, where we would appoint members of the community, veterans, members of the city to watch over the park. But as it stands, we're saying that we're going to hand over control of a piece of city property to an entity that was neither elected nor appointed. And I don't think that is the correct way to go about doing this. Thirdly, I'm not entirely sure why we added in a section about family friendly and alcohol. I think that warrants further discussion as well, not only with Victory Park, but with all public property here in Norwood. Because of these reasons, I don't support having 2 readings of this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to motion that we put these 3 individual items in committee of the whole.
There's a motion already.
I get to motion to put things in committee.
Yeah, we had that at the, actually, I think the last meeting, or the meeting before that one, where you can place something into committee, even though there's a motion on the table.
Thank you. So I would like to motion that we put these 3 things in committee of the whole as individual items. Item number 1, historical properties within the city of Norwood. I remember Mr. Geraci saying, even when he first talked about doing the historical properties and being able to get grant funding and such, I would like to make sure that if we do an ordinance for that, that we're covering off on the proper language to make sure that we can take advantage of calling these historical properties. For section 2, I would like to put in a discussion of the best way to represent the monument in the city's interests when it comes to any kind of renovation that might be planned, even though there is no renovation planned. And item 3, to discuss the use of alcohol on city property, where we stand currently with our current ordinances and how we might want to change those in the future.
Motion on the floor is, in which committee did you want that in?
Committee of the whole, please.
Okay. Motion is to place these 3 items into committee of the whole. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. I appreciate the comments, Mr. Thompson.
Just
and
point
I
of order.
share-
It needs a second.
We've got to have a second before we have discussion.
Oh, I will second Mr. Thompson's
Okay.
motion.
Second by Mr. Brady.
I do have some comments, please, Mr.
Okay,
President.
just go ahead.
Thank you. I want to once again say I thank Mr. Thompson for his comments. I share a lot of the issues that what he said, and a couple things come to mind when it comes to this. I haven't spoke to anyone that is gunning for the memorials at Victory Park. I haven't heard anyone publicly speak or anything say that they want to do anything to these memorials. I've never heard that. I'd be interested to know if anyone is. One other point, does anyone remember summer days? When I was a child, we used to go to Victory Park for our biggest festival of the year and hang out in Victory, and it was a really, really fun time. And maybe it wasn't all great. Maybe there were some issues that I was too young to know about, but I surely did have a good time in Victory Park at summer days. And those of you who don't know about that were missed out. Finally, I know that the administration has adamantly said that they are not against this. They do not want to give up any type of issues like you just addressed. I think that the board is a good idea. So they're against it. Therefore, for those reasons, I won't be supporting this. So, thanks.
Mr. Tracy.
First, this was sent back to one committee to be reworked. It absolutely was reworked based on the concerns and priorities that were brought up at that meeting, and the reason why it was sent back to committee. To send it to committee of the whole after it was been worked up by one committee is just, it's outrageous. Second, there have been talks about moving those monuments. I mean, the resolution that was voted on here by council, except me, had those plans in that resolution. Those plans were posted online for 6, 7, 8 months. They're right there in the original plans that were put out there, that the monuments and the tank would be moved. Third, this isn't to give over control to the Veteran Park Association. They've made that clear to us that they don't want control of it. This isn't anything, we want them to be involved with the discussions if the time comes that something needs to be adjusted. It may never be adjusted, but they want to be involved with it. And the reason that Summer Days was moved from Victory Park down to Waterworks is because of the drinking one year. It got out of control. So it was moved. Yes, Mr. Braden. I may be young, but I still remember. That was the reason it was moved, because of the drinking up there and the alcohol problems. I understand the sentimental value of Summer Days and all that. That's great. It was moved because of one reason: alcohol. If we're having family events up there, we don't need to have alcohol around children. We don't need to be having people get sloppy around their kids or other kids. It's not what we need. We need a family-friendly park.
Mr. Thompson.
Just to respond to a couple of things, I realize that we put this in committee before. I think you made the motion, but I seconded it, and I wanted it in committee. Matter of fact, I'm in that committee, but was unable to attend that meeting. Otherwise, I would have brought these concerns up during that meeting. One of the reasons I want to put it back in committee is because I don't feel that the issues were addressed properly. So, first you don't succeed, try again. And I want to state this on number 2, the Montgomery Road plan. I just want to state this for everybody in here to hear on council, for everybody in the audience, and for everybody listening. We accepted that plan by resolution. We did not tie ourselves to that plan in any way, shape, or form. We said we would take it into consideration and we would use it as a tool to help inform our decisions on how we may or may not improve the Montgomery Road corridor. There were several suggestions in there that may happen or may not happen. There were things that, I remember there was a wedge park down there next to where Tire Discounters is. I don't think that would ever happen, but it was suggested in there. They suggested evening streets, so it was a cleaner pass-through. There are all kinds of things in that plan that were just suggestions. It's like a gift of, here's some tools you could potentially use if you ever want to get around to making Montgomery Road better. We are under no circumstances obligated to do any of them, and to use that as an excuse to drum up fear that there might be something being done to the Victory Park against the wishes of council and the administration is quite frankly, it upsets me. And I've said so to other people outside of here, but I just want to say it now. Anyway, I think the best thing to do is I want to stress that I in no way want anything to happen to the memorials. I want to set this up to be a kind of situation where they are protected. I just don't think this is the way to do it. Lastly, when it comes to alcohol in parks, our very own Catholic Church Festival up the street, I take my kids there every year. They serve alcohol. Disney World serves alcohol. Kings Island serves alcohol. It's all about how it's regulated and controlled at the spot, which is why I think it deserves a broader discussion about alcohol and public property in Norwood. Thank you.
Motion on the table is to place these 3 items in the committee of the whole. Any other discussion? Just to put my thoughts in, I agree with Mr. Thompson in on section 2. I have a little part about that, and I really like the board idea. I really do like the fact of we need to address section 1 at an even greater capacity. I disagree on 3. I kind of look at Victory Park is, that's our memorial park. That's our cemetery without actually having the bodies there. Those names represent those bodies. And so I feel on that. It was placed in the committee, and I know you were on vacation, you weren't able to attend that, but there was some changes made, and I think that this is a good ordinance to go forward with. I think that there's some things that we should come back with, especially with that section 1. We should expound on that, and I think maybe Mr. Kelch or Mr. Geraci was talking or starting to research if we could actually have that dedicated formally with the big plaque, as a historical site. But for that reason, I will, vote to continue on with the ordinance and not place it in committee. Any other discussion? Mr. Geraci?
Just to expand on what you had stated, sometime next week I will be in discussions with an individual who writes this stuff for the state, writes the legislation for the state. So he knows exactly what content to put in there, how to write it and get it passed. And I'll be working sometime next week. I'm not sure which day, probably Thursday. I'll be starting that discussion with him to get the legislation written up so that we can get a nice plaque up there, start getting some money down for that park so that we're not like killing our entire budget on the park, and to help the Veterans Association out a little bit.
Any other discussion? All right, so just to be clear, this vote is on whether to place these 3 items that Mr. Thompson brought up into committee of a whole. Call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
No.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
No.
Mr. DiNardo?
No.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
It's 3 to 3, 3 to 4. Okay. Yes.
The no's
Not
one.
bad. I just counted there. And what's that? The no's have it. So we will go forth with the, is there any further discussion on second and third reading of the current ordinance as it is drafted? Mr. Kelch?
If that motion still stands, I know that one's superseded. I would be comfortable with amending it to having the second reading to allow Mr. Thompson some more time to kind of look into these things, have more discussions.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Thompson?
I honestly don't need more time to look into anything. I think that this deserves a board, and I don't think that we should be giving control over city property. It says where is it?
Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry, I can't hear you at all.
Yeah.
It says without the prior no maintenance or City Norwood shall not, without prior approval of the Victory Park Veterans Association, American Legion Post 123, remove, modify, or relocate any of the features. So we are putting a piece of city property in the hands of a non-elected, appointed group. We don't have control over how they select their membership, over how they make their decisions. It's not a public process, and this is a piece of public property that you're putting in the hands of, and you say that you can't do anything with that. So even though you're saying you're not putting it in their hands, we can't do anything in those areas without their approval. And I understand that's some of you may want to do that, but I know that this was brought because there was concern that there was an outside group that you were afraid or concerned that would have control over a piece of public property in Norwood. And it seems disingenuous to then to solve that problem by handing over that piece of property to another outside group.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So, just a little bit about Section 2 that I can kind of just go ahead and explain, since I guess we're still motioning to have the second and third ordinance. reading. So in the past, this relationship with the Victory Park Veterans Association, which I kind of, would say that's kind of set up in the way of a board kind of for this park already. And the American Legion Post 123, membership's real simple. Be a veteran. Be a family member of a veteran, or be a child of a veteran. And when we're talking about handing over city property, we're talking about handing over monuments that these people served with, for other people that have paid the ultimate price for our freedom, that have a little bit more expertise and knowledge about what this thing means, obviously, than we do, as we are sitting here, again, at a third meeting with a different second ordinance, trying to just tell these people, we want to have a relationship with you. We want to be here for you. We want to make sure that this park that represents what you guys fought for, what you stood for, and what you are here for, what we're all here for, is protected. So I have no problem handing the Wall of Remembrance, the Pathway of Freedom, the POWMA Monument, the cannon, the U.S. Army battle tank and its enclosure, and any additional features to be erected in recognition of armed services personnel to either of these groups, because they know a whole hell of a lot more about it and what it means than anybody in this room sitting on this side of that wall. So, no, I don't have a problem with that. My reason for the second and third reading is so that we can get this thing done for them. So we're not kicking the can a little bit further down the road, so that these people feel, hey, they do want to have a relationship with us. They do want to work with us. They just want to see this stuff here. And whether or not anybody's going to sit here and try to say that there was not a plan, nobody said anything about doing anything with the memorials, whether we like it or not, whether we remember it or not, we all sat here through the resolution that we passed to adopt the Montgomery Road Plan that had in it a rendering of Victory Park, completely reworked, with all the memorials gone, with one little itty-bitty memorial over here off to the side. All right, whether we're binded to that or not, whether it's an ordinance, resolution, all that or not, it was a plan brought forth. So we can't actually say that, I don't know why they're worried about these memorials, or nobody's talking about taking them away, when in fact they are. There was discussion. Ideas, seeds of ideas turn into truth trees, reality trees. It happens that way. And whether you guys remember it or not, I even asked about Victory Park and that rendering during that presentation. So yeah, there are people out there, that are talking about changing the look of Victory Park. So that's the reason I asked for the second and third reading. That's the reason I want to get this thing done for the Veterans Association, for the veterans in Norwood, for the American Legion Post in Norwood.
Mr. Tracy.
Just one last thing. If you'd like to speak with the Veterans Association or the Legion, who we've been talking to about this and going back and forth to change this, absolutely, I can set that up. I know they've been trying to get a hold of a lot of the council members, not just myself and Mr. Kelch. I'll set you up and get you a Friday night conversation if you'd like to have that. But they understand that we're not looking to give them control of that park. They understand that.
Mr. Bonds, just to...
Thank you very much. I just want to be as clear as possible, because Norwood Together has tried to explain what happened multiple times. There were no plans put forward to move the monuments. There was a rendering in the original plan that was presented to the community that included some artist representation of what Victory Park might look like. And at the public meeting, people were expressed concern there that that potentially, are you trying to move the monuments? And that wasn't their intention. So in the first part of the plan, they took out that rendering. But in the appendix of the plan, the very last few pages, they have like the potential streetscape all up and down Montgomery Road, like what the street could look like, what different things could look like. And in that part of the plan, they did not take out the rendering. And I think that, and they've expressed it multiple times, that was an omission, that they had no intention to say that the monuments were going to be moved. And I think for people on council to continue to insinuate that when the record has been corrected, I think they're lying, essentially. And so, just want to put that forth there. Personally, I don't really care if we do both readings tonight or not. I mean, I know how I'm going to vote on the ordinance. And I'm going to vote the same way either way. So, to me, it's really,
Okay.
I don't think anybody's opinions are going to be changed in 2 weeks or 4 weeks.
Thanks. Mr. Thompson?
Question to the chair, to Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci, if you're stating that you don't want to give control over the park to the Veterans Association, and they don't want control of the park, then would you be willing to amend Section 2 of this ordinance, rather to say without prior approval, to say without prior notification, without prior consultation, so that it's not solely in the hands of a group of non-elected officials?
Absolutely, I would be willing to change that to without prior consultation or without prior discussion, something to that language, because I want to make sure that they're involved. I want to make sure that they're, because they do a lot to take care of that park, and they put a lot of money into it. I know, one person that has put, that 1 year put almost $800 to $1,000 into that park. So out of their own money, out of their own pocket.
No,
So
I understand.
I'm okay with going with consultation or discussion or something along those lines to amend it to that. I'm okay with that. I would have to defer that also over to Mr. Kelch as well, since he was on this as part of a co-authoring of it.
Mr. Kelch?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, I think that's fair. I think we can change it from approval to consultation.
So we need a motion to amend this particular ordinance.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say I'm going to amend my original motion to have the second, third reading while amending Section 2 from saying without prior approval of the Victory Park Veterans Association American Legion Post 123 to without prior consultation.
Similar, sorry.
It's forcing the discussion to have that conversation.
Mr. Thompson?
You had similar language in the original ordinance when it came to hosting events.
Yes.
It was without first consulting. I still would prefer there to be a separate board that had members of veterans as well as community members doing this. But if we're looking for compromise here, I would accept that. But I would prefer that Mr. Moore weigh in on this, and he is not sitting in his chair right now.
Well, sorry,
Mr. Kelch?
Mr. President, sorry about that. Per the standing rules of council, we are able to amend text on the floor of an ordinance. So
Mr. Kelch, you're making the motion, and do we have a second on that motion? Mr. Geraci?
I'll second the motion.
So Mr. Kelch first, then Mr. Geraci seconds a motion to amend the initial. You seconded the initial second and third, right? No.
No.
You did. Okay. So you guys are amending your motion to still have the second and third and amend this section 2 to replace without prior approval to prior consultation.
Yes.
Here was a point of order. So because we're amending the text of it, I think we actually have to do all 3 readings of the ordinance. Can we maybe hear from Mr. Moore just to confirm that?
That's correct. You can amend the ordinance, but then you have to start over on the reading. So you got to start with one all over again. So if it's the will of council to pass something with consultation, you can make the motion. I make a motion to amend the ordinance to change it to consultation. That passes, and then I make a motion to have all 3 readings. You can do that, but that's the progress.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, all right, I would like to make the motion or amend my motion to change the wordage from without the prior approval to prior consultation.
Do I have a second? Mr. Geraci?
Second the motion.
All right. So we have Mr. Kelch and Mr. Geraci seconding to, for a motion to amend this ordinance with the change in section 2 from without prior approval to prior consultation. Any discussion? Call the roll. Oh, Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. So yeah, I don't have no problem supporting amendment to the ordinance. I still have other issues with this ordinance. You know, namely, I haven't heard, so we back and forth with, I haven't heard anyone come out with, you know, I got a problem with meaningless, and you know, I want to be careful because you won't find another patriot like myself, and I'll stand in front of the veterans here today, and I'll protect this monument just as well as they will. So you won't find another patriot as well. So my problems is, you know, where are the people that want to move these ordinances, and you said that they does, well, I want a name, and I like a date when this happened. And you can say that it was in the ordinance, but it wasn't. So that's what I've got a problem with that. I got a problem with some other issues here that we've discussed. It's already been discussed. So I don't have no problem voting for the amendment, but I'm still don't like this ordinance. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes. Mr. Kelch.
I'd like to make a motion to have all 3 readings of this ordinance.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kelch.
I'd like to make a motion to have all 3 readings of this ordinance.
Okay, second by Mr. Geraci. Discussion? Mr. Thompson.
Just want to say I appreciate your willingness to work on this. I like my friend here to my left, Mr. Braden. I still have problems with the ordinance. I still would like to have seen these things go into a broader discussion. As a result, I'm going to stick with my guns and vote no on this. Again, it is no reflection of the veterans or the memorials themselves, but I would like to have seen this ordinance broke up and handled differently. Thank you.
Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I am going to vote yes on the 3 readings. I mean, I do think the ordinance is clear. I think that we have had multiple meetings on it. We've had a lot of feedback from the community, so I'll be voting yes on the 3 readings. I do still have concerns about the ordinance, but I don't have any concerns about the fact that people know about it.
Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
Bear with me just 1 second, guys.
Ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose as amended. Ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose as amended. Ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose as amended.
Mr. Kelch.
I'd like to make a motion to pass the ordinance.
Mr. Geraci.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Braden?
No.
Vote of 4-3, the motion passes. Next, we have ordinance to change appropriations for year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
May I please have all 3 readings tonight?
Mr. Thompson.
I'll second.
discussion? Mr. DiNardo.
I can help just what's in here. Recreation, the $20,000 being moved is for work that the rec department is going to do in-house rather than outsourced, which was originally what their mind was. The increased appropriations to the DAG fund, that's in support of something we're going to see later. I think it was with the body cams. And then the $3.88 million moving from the Corona fund to the American Recovery Fund is really because that's the name of the act. So,
Mr. Dracy.
What is the DAG fund?
so this is, I think it's for the police overflow when they recover.
It's one of the drug funds.
Yeah, the drug funds when they recover, I don't know.
Seizures?
Drug, yeah.
Yeah.
Drug and paraphernalia stuff.
We're able to move the money from our general to that.
No, that's not what's happening. So you spend appropriations, you can't spend cash. So we're increasing the appropriations so that we can actually use it potentially in an ordinance, if you vote for it, in an ordinance coming later for those body cams.
Okay.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you. Yeah, just to further kind of expand, so the cash is already in the fund. Council is just not given permission to spend it yet. So this ordinance just gives them authorization they can spend an additional $40,000 out of that fund if they wanted to this year.
Any other discussion? Motion.
Just that I would recommend that you guys all vote to have all three readings because it will enable us to do some of the things that we're going to do later.
Motion is to have all three readings. Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes. Have all three readings.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. DiNardo.
I can make a motion that we pass the ordinance, please.
Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So before we vote on this, I would just like to kind of bring us back to like last meeting where we talked about an ordinance approving the state service director to go seek bids for the radio read water meters. It was sent to us by the mayor in email, and I responded to the mayor and said, hey, are these funds that we can use for Elm Avenue or any other storm sewer issues we have in Norwood? And at the time, it was under CARES Act funding, which we could not. That was money, that CARES Act funds are not money we could use for storm sewer projects. Well, moving it into the American Recovery Act Fund, those are, in fact, that I found out through my research, not only my research, but my research was confirmed today by a member of Brad Winstrup's office, that the American Recovery Act Fund money is, in fact, funds that we can use for storm sewer projects and infrastructure projects like that. So my reason for bringing this up is this $3.8 million is a large amount of money that we're having coming into our city. And what I would implore council to do, the administration to do, is really look at what we're spending this money on. Really think about the things that our city needs. I'm not saying that I don't support radio read water meters. I would love to bring our water department into the 21st century, as I'm sure everybody in Norwood would. But at the same time, you know, to me it's Elm Avenue, other storm sewer areas in Norwood. We really need to bring them up to the priority list. And I would really like to see council, the administration moving forward, really look into what we're spending this money on. Really look into I would say the kind of like a priority kind of a list thing. And everybody's going to have different priorities. And I will send this email to everybody on council and administration from this representative in Mr. Winstrup's office that says, yes, in fact, these funds can be used for storm sewer projects. And that's huge for Norwood.
Yes, thanks. It'd be also, I wish the mayor was here, because I know that when we were looking at how to use when the administration was looking at how to use the CARES Act fund, I remember a comment that the auditor said is, well, we found out we can't use it for that, but we can use it for the ambulance. That suggests that there is a list somewhere. And if we have Mr. Wenstrup or his office saying that we can use it, again, that suggests that there is a yes or no list somewhere. And I think it would be really helpful for the administration to find out the list that they used with the CARES Act and find out the list for the American Recovery Act, because that would be definitive evidence to saying, yes, we can, or yes, we can't. And I think it's just, at this point, it's super important to get right from the horse's mouth, what does the act say? Because I know you did a bunch of research looking, using Google. I know you had the office, a higher power representative say something. There's got to be a legal document that went along with the act that we can't find that says yes or no. And I know it exists because we did it the first time with the CARES Act. So I wish the mayor was here. What's the best way to convey that message? Hey, there has to be a yes or no list.
I would suggest that during maybe new business that you ask a letter be sent to the mayor and safety service director requesting that from Congressman Winstrup's office to see, so we can get that, and I think that's an outstanding idea.
Cool. Thanks.
Mr. Dracy.
I'm glad Mr. Kelch brought that up, because I was getting ready to call him today when he called me to let him know that I had feelers out there myself regarding this. And I was supposed to get a call back this week regarding the CARES Act money and Elm Avenue itself, just to see if I could help him out a little bit. I'm sure I'll still get that call sometime this week, because I'm sure the big wigs up in Ohio aren't watching a little town meeting like this. But it's good that Mr. Kelch and myself have those connections to state reps to be able to verify information and get information such as what we have been doing. So, it's important that this be taken care of immediately. And one suggestion that I might have is maybe discuss with MSD on splitting the cost of the project. Go 50-50 on it.
Further discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we just did three.
L2, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund Program and to execute contracts as required and declare an emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of this.
Mr. DiNardo.
A second, please.
Discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes. Have all three readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Transit Infrastructure Fund programs and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes, please. A second.
Any discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Members voting yes, motion passes. Moving on to L3. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone, LLC for certain telephone services, equipment, and internet services, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Mr. DiNardo.
I would second, please.
Discussion, Mr. Geraci.
Point of order. The person that makes the motion, Council Rules, gets
All right,
the first
Mr.
chance.
Bonzo.
Thank you so much. This ordinance is here just because our current phone provider that we have, there's been a lot of issues. When there are issues, it's hard to get them to come out. They basically have told the city multiple times it's not our problem. The amount that we're going to be paying here for this one is less than what we currently pay system-wide. T.A. Brown kind of confirmed all this to me today, so for that reason, I think we should do all three readings. Thank you.
Mr. Geraci.
I was hoping for one reading on this. This is quite a big packet here for roughly 2 days of reading. While I have other obligations, I did not get this packet until about Saturday afternoon. So this is a pretty decent packet for 2 days of reading. I'd like some more time to look this over and adjust.
Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we know, does this have anything to do with those big ugly telephone poles they're putting up with 5G? This has nothing to do with that? Okay, all right. So, because I thumbed through this a little bit, it seems like a standard contract agreement to me. If it doesn't have to do with those telephone poles, then I can support this.
Any other discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. And just want to remind Council, as Mr. Geraci did earlier, we probably won't be meeting anymore in July unless there's a special meeting. So we'll be putting the city basically 4 weeks behind when they've made the decision and they're ready to move forward now. So it's just better for us to get this done now so that they can take care of it. Please.
Mr. Geraci.
I guess I'm just trying to look at what other council members have done and look at requesting one reading for certain things, but I guess we can all just do our hypocritical thing and request one reading whenever we feel it's necessary for ourselves. That's fine.
Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members vote aye. All three readings, please.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone, LLC for certain telephone service, equipment, and internet services, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone, LLC for certain telephone service equipment and internet services and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a 60-month contract under the State Bid Purchase Program with Cincinnati Bell Telephone, LLC for certain telephone service, equipment, and internet services and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Mr. Bernardo,
Second, please.
discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
The members voting aye, the motion passes. L4, ordinance adding chapter 1761 of the Norwood codified ordinances to establish the tobacco products sales licensing program. Mr. Kelch.
I would actually like to motion that we move this item to the Law and Order Committee. It seems like a pretty wealthy or lengthy ordinance, and there's a lot in here that I'm just kind of confused about on, license stuff and costs and all that. I would like to see it go there for a second look, see if we can change anything, see if it works for Norwood.
Mr. Dracy.
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. President, we have Brian Williamson, the Health Commissioner here, and I think he'd like to say a few words explaining what this is all about.
All right. Yeah, we're in discussion now. Brian, if you'd like to come forward and share about this ordinance.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak about this proposed ordinance. In June, our Board of Health provided unanimous support for this ordinance. So what this does, we estimate there's 20 locations that sell tobacco or nicotine products in Norwood. And the federal law is basically set what you could think of the speed limit, which in this case is you can't buy these products unless you're 21 years or older. So we're not setting a new age limit. What we are looking at doing is using the health department to be the monitor, to put people into the field to do promotion, education, to ensure that tobacco isn't being sold, or tobacco or nicotine products isn't being sold to people that are underage. So what this does is it takes it from a federal program into a local ordinance. And I do have an expert on tobacco prevention here that would like to answer questions as well.
Mr. Dracy.
I guess my first question, which I was trying to write down as quickly as I could here. Have we had violations, like serious violations of selling underage like we have with alcohol?
One issue, this only looks at tobacco nicotine, so that is something that the health department has not been involved with at whether our locations are selling things.
That didn't answer my question. My question was, have we as a city had the problems as we've had with liquor sales to underage, selling to underage people?
The health department, I don't have that information or data at the health department at this point in time. One of the concerns that I have from my previous experience with tobacco programs is this also picks up nicotine, which the health departments have had less involvement with that. So this would pick up locations that are also selling vaping and other electronic types of nicotine products.
Mr. Tracy.
Follow up. I'm trying to wrap my head around why we're trying to, as Mr. Braden brought up several times this year, being a gatekeeper for something that is already has a task force by the state, and that they go out with their agents to do undercover things, such as they do with alcohol. I mean, we don't have an ordinance with the health department going out with undercover agents doing alcohol stings. So what's the, I'm trying to figure out how this is a huge problem for the city of Norwood that we have to have an ordinance.
Brian, maybe we could defer to...
Right, I can start, as a public health standpoint, my stance on this would be, I can't think of anything with tobacco or nicotine products that are good for health on the long term. So as a public health representative, in our motto of prevent, protect, and promote. That's what our effort is here. With the earlier question about the license fee, for 20 facilities and the license fee that's proposed, it isn't about a financial effort for the health department. This is purely a protect and prevent future problems. As far as violations that they're seeing in our neighboring jurisdictions.
That's neighboring, that's not Norwood.
Good evening. If I might address the council for just a few moments. So now I'm going to give you an example of what the issue is here in Ohio by telling you a little bit about a story. So when my son, my second oldest son, Adam, was about 9 years old, we were at a family barbecue. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, Mom, may I have another Coke?" And I said, "Son," I said, "I would prefer you did not have another Coke. You had one earlier. That's enough for today." And well, maybe 20 minutes later, I see him with a can of Coke in his hand. And I said, "Adam, I just said that you don't, not to have another can of Coke." And he said, "Well, actually, Mom, that's not what you said. What you said is that I would prefer that I don't have another Coke. You never said I could not have another Coke." So in that example, Adam found a loophole in the law. And what we have here in Ohio is a loophole that needs to be closed. See, at the state level, where we do tobacco retail licensing, it does not exist. It exists from a state auditor's process. So in other words, a tobacco retailer does need to have a state tax to be able to sell tobacco products on combustible cigarettes. There is no licensing program for vapor products in Ohio. And so that loophole needs closed. Here in the city of Norwood, for instance, we know that there are 21 retailers that sell combustible tobacco products. Combustible products, you would think of are cigarettes, cigars, cigarillos. Those are combustible products. There is no way to monitor or enforce compliance among retailers who sell vapor product only items. In Norwood, in fact, there's no way to identify those vapor product sellers without actually doing a Google search about vape shops. And in doing so, I know there are 5 that are located here at the moment in the city of Norwood that have no enforcement jurisdiction overseeing, there's no one overseeing the fact that they're not selling to young people. And do we have a problem in Norwood? I would say probably, just like we have a problem in many other cities here in Ohio that are retailers that are selling to underage individuals because that's their market base. Yes.
Mr. Bonzo? Yeah, thank you. So when, I mean, it's my understanding that there's ordinances like this in other communities as well. Could you talk about that? And then when they did implement, did they find that there was non-compliance of the Tobacco 21?
Yes, thank you. There are actually a number of communities throughout Ohio that have established a tobacco retail license. Closest to you, of course, is the city of Cincinnati. They established their TRL to enforce 21 about 2 years ago now, and are now doing their compliance checks in the city of Cincinnati. They are finding non-compliance rates that are quite high among their retailers. And another community, the city of Columbus, has had a tobacco retail license and Tobacco 21 in place now since 2017. They found that their compliance among retailers is much more effective now than it ever has been. See, the problem with our current system through the FDA is that compliance rates and the accrual for non-compliance is too long a period of time. So a retailer might be non-compliant. They might get a retailer check. For instance, since 2018, there's been one compliance check done by the state for the tobacco retailers that exist here in Norwood. Right, so you're talking about at least 21 retailers that we know exist. One of them has been checked. That store actually failed their violation check. They were given a letter by the FDA saying, hey, listen, on such and such a day you failed your compliance check, and nothing has been done since then to follow up on that violation. This ordinance would allow the health department to do one enforcement check per year on every retailer that currently exists. Imagine it very similar to our food licensing program that exists within the health department. And then in addition to that, violators, there is an accrual that then allows to revoke their license to sell tobacco products if they continue to be non-compliant under the current licensing program through the health department. Again, I also want to say it also removes criminal penalties and places it in a civil penalty category. So it's no longer that clerk getting a misdemeanor charge that accidentally sells or maybe wasn't well educated and sells to an underage individual.
Just real quick, could you state your name and your title just
Yes.
for the record?
Sorry, yes, I'm Wendy Hyde. I'm with the Preventing Tobacco Addiction Foundation, Tobacco 21.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Hyde, thank you for being here today. I appreciate the effort that the health department and yourself is moving forward here. Can you walk me through a compliance check? Like, what do you mean by a compliance check? You're going to send an underage someone to try to buy?
Sure. So our compliance checks is done in two different ways. So the compliance would also be that stores and many of these stores are already, some of them are already being checked for food license, but at the same time, they would go in, make sure that they have proper signage, that they're saying that we only sell to those who are of age. They would be checking to make sure that they're not selling loosies or that the products that they're selling are as they're supposed to be. And in addition to that, the compliance checks themselves is when then you have individuals who are brought on to do the checks. Those individuals between the ages of 18 and 20, they would go as decoys after being educated about how to go in and do buys in these retail stores.
Thank you. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I had several questions here. I was going through this today. A lot of this is actually covered under the Tobacco 21 ordinance. And you know, the age verifications, it's under ORC 2927, section 02. Most of the prohibited sales sections covered under Tobacco 21. And a little snippet of Tobacco 21 is makes it illegal to provide cigarettes, other tobacco products, vaping devices, and vaping liquid to anyone other younger than 21. So, I mean, these are things that are covered. And I would like to point out that in this section 1761.04 fees, it's $400 for each business. It's $400 a year. And if you go back to the first page or whatever, let me see. No. And it's under license required application. It says every year they would have to apply for a new license, which is $400. The state of Ohio only requires a retailer $125 for a state permit to sell cigarettes or tobacco products. So, but we're going to charge $400 in this ordinance. I don't think, I am not a fan of any person under the legal age of smoking cigarettes or vaping of any kind. There are dangers present, and that's clear. But I think it's a bit egregious to charge $400 for a permit to do business in the city you've been in doing business for a product that is not a controlled substance or classified as a controlled substance. So I just think that's adding redundant legislature here, since a lot of this is already covered under state law. It seems like, you know, big government coming down on these retail shops. A lot of them are smaller mom and pop shops. They're not all like UDF, you know. So a mayor stop right there down the street. Sunoco right down the street. I mean, these aren't big money businesses. So I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of things in here I think we can look at. I think we can see if that's what fits here in Norwood. I think we can talk to the police chief, say, hey, do we have a lot of, you know, minors going and buying cigarettes? Are you guys hearing this? Like, to see if this is what we need at this time.
If I can comment on the proposed fee, with our food program